In the Slammer. 35 years inside with Noel Razor Smith.
Hello and welcome to In the Slammer, 35 years inside with Noel Razor Smith. My name's Elliott Frisby and this is the podcast where we talk the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So previously we talked about how you sort of first stepped into the world of crime, and it makes me something I've always been curious about myself, and I'm sure others would as well. What's the actual sentencing process absolutely like? Because what people tend to go on is what they see on television. You know, they go in, they get carried through this nice sort of corridor, they get put in this wooden stand, which always looks perfectly waxed down. But what's it like? And also, considering it was back in the 70s when it sort of first happened for you, the difference throughout the years.
Well, one quite interesting thing that I've always thought was interesting was the Old Bailey. I first appeared at the Old Bailey in 1977 for sentencing when I was 16. And the Old Bailey, if you go... Recently, I had occasion to go to a do at the Old Bailey on a Saturday, and it is absolutely beautiful. If you go into the actual building, all the marble, the statues, the paintings, luxury, it's fantastic. The courtroom's the same, you know, the courtrooms are steeped in kind of luxury, if you like, you know, they look so good. And then you go downstairs in the Old Bailey, and of course, some of the cells down there date back to Newgate Prison, which used to stand on the site. You can't stretch your arms out sideways in those cells. Those cells, they're called dog boxes. And it is absolutely filthy. And here's an example. 1977, they kept me in a cell in the Old Bailey while I was being sentenced. I was down there for a couple of days and read all the graffiti on the walls, as you do, because there is so much of it. And then in 1999, I was back in the Old Bailey again, and they put me back in the same cell, and none of the graffiti was gone. It was all the same graffiti. Johnny, sentenced to life, 1972. There's all food stains up the walls where people have been sentenced and got the ump and throw their grub up the walls. It is filthy down there. It really is. There's rats, cockroaches. So you've got all this opulence above ground, and below where the prisoners are kept, you're coming up from absolute filth to stand in this pristine courtroom and be sentenced by this guy in these beautiful red robes and white wig, and there you are. And then you've got to go back down into this cockroach-infested place underneath. You'll find that's quite common with a lot of the old courthouses. And what a lot of people don't realise, you see on the telly the guy coming into the dock and that, and it's probably, for most people, it's the most frightening and nervous time of their life. When you've been found guilty and you're waiting for sentence, I mean, it really is tension-filled. You don't know what you're going to get. And what your barrister does, he will tell you, he'll give you a kind of a range of sentences you could get. So he'll say, well, you might be getting 25 to 30 years, or you might get 10 years, and you're hoping for 10 years. And that's the only time when you're in court about to be sentenced that you would accept 10 years in prison rather than 20.
Yeah.
If someone in normal life said to you 10 years or 20 in prison, you wouldn't want to know. But it's kind of, you're hoping for the lower sentence. But when you stand in that box to be sentenced, you're on your own. You know, basically you're there. Everything's been found out about you. You've been stripped bare. And then you've got this judge. And whether the judge, you know, a lot of judges are fair, I've got to say. They really are. But some of them can be a bit biased. It depends, you know. They're normal people like everybody else. And I had a judge in 1998 after my second trial at the Old Bailey who was my barrister described him, my QC described him as an old-fashioned judge. Whereas, I don't know if you've ever heard Peter Cook do that, the biased judge sketch, where he says to the jury, you may think so-and-so was a lovely, honest person. On the other hand, you might think they're a terrible, evil liar. He was one of those judges. And didn't say anything that could be appealable, but kind of made it clear to the jury before they went out that I was guilty. And when it came to sentence me, he knew what he was doing. This is the thing. And if a judge sentences you to life or an indeterminate sentence, they know that whatever they say at their sentencing is going to be looked at 10 or 20 years down the line when it comes time to release you. The parole board will read, one of the things they have to read is the judge's sentencing remarks. And this judge wasn't content with giving me 8 life sentences for armed robbery. plus 8 lots of 10 years concurrent, so that's 80 years concurrent, 8 life sentences. He then said in his judge's remarks, and I also hope that when it comes time for you to be released, that any parole board looking at your case will not be fooled into thinking that you have changed your ways because you've tried that so many times before and it's failed.
Would you say this guy liked you?
No, he didn't. He absolutely hated me. He was one of those kind of judges who would make a kind of half-witty remark during the trial, and then constantly repeat it throughout the trial, hoping for more laughs. You know.
So would you say that when you see these TV programs where you've got a judge like that, do you think they're kind of based on a little bit of truth?
Oh yeah. I mean, some judges can be judges have got reputations amongst criminals, amongst police officers, amongst barristers. Like a barrister might come to you down in the cells before the court and say, we've got Judge so-and-so, he hates robbers, or he hates this, or he gives really bad sentences. Or they might come and say, we've got Judge so-and-so, he's quite good, and, you might end up getting probation. I think there's many. The trouble with judges, for me, is the fact that they know very little of real life. They're born into money. They then go to public school, boarding school. They then go off to university, and then they go into the law where they're closeted. And then when they become judges, they never set foot on the street. They've got a car to pick them up to bring them to court from their country seat. They rarely see normal people. So when it comes to sentencing, I've found, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this, if it's property crime, if you've stolen money, judges are more likely to crack down on you, especially if you're a bank robber, because a lot of their friends are bank managers and people who run banks and stuff like that. And a lot of people say, well, if you're a sex offender, judges seem to treat you all right. And I've often heard this argument that judges have been to boarding school and public school where buggery and things like that of other young children is kind of not the norm, but it's kind of acceptable, or it was in public schools up until, say, the 60s. So when they see a guy who's up for, say, raping a 10-year-old boy, and this has happened to me, I don't mean I've raped a 10-year-old boy, but I was actually up in court the last time. When I got my, I got 23 and a half years at Knightsbridge Crown Court back in 1989. And the same judge who sentenced me to 23 and a half years for bank robbery sentenced a police officer straight after me, who had raped a 14-year-old girl in his police car whilst he was on duty, and he got 7 years. And eventually, he got released because it turned out the judge didn't emphasise his previous good character. It's that kind of thing. So judges are... Yeah.
You're also saying that they could be quite fair as well.
They can, yes.
So
there is a lot of
what
good fair judges.
Because that's pretty bad what you've just said to me. Like that's pretty bad stuff.
It's reality.
Yeah, exactly. But what can you give me an example of what you mean by fair?
Right. I was this is a prime example. I was on remand for 3 malicious wounding charges and possession of firearms. And I'd been on remand for 10 months because the incident that happened and the guys who I was allegedly had slashed with a razor were all villains themselves, and they didn't really want to come to court. So every time the police went to them and try and take statements, they'd disappear. So I was on remand for 10 months in prison. I'd had a good job. I was living with my family. This was the early 80s. I had 3 kids and I was getting on quite well. I was working in the building game. And then suddenly this incident on a Saturday night, I was arrested. I'm in prison in Wormwood Scrubs for 10 months. And every judge we went up in front of in that 10 months, because you have to go for remands and stuff, my brief was asking for bail. And they went, no, these charges are too serious. His previous is too serious. You can't have bail. I then was due for trial on the 22nd of December at Maidstone Crown Court. So they took me up to Maidstone Crown Court, and I had a woman judge who I'd never seen before. So she said, right, what's happening here? So the prosecution said, well, we can't run the trial today. We're going to have to do it in January or February. So, he's got to be remanded back into custody because of the seriousness of the crime. And this woman judge looked at papers and she went, He's been in custody for 10 months and you still haven't come up with anything to justify this. Yes, he's charged with serious crimes, but he hasn't been convicted of these serious crimes. And I'm standing there like that in the box thinking, she's doing better than my brief.
Was that the first time you found some element of kindness?
It was, from a judge, yes. And what she'd done was, she said, has Mr. Smith got any children? So my briefer stood up and said, yes, he's got 3 young children. And she went, well, it's Christmas in 2 days. She said, and I'm not going to remand him into custody just because you're not ready. And she went, I'm going to release Mr. Smith on bail on his own recognizance and let me out for Christmas. And sure enough, the trial was in February and I came back for the trial and I was found not guilty on the trial. So that was a judge who had a bit of humanity, looked at the fact that I had a young family and I'd already served all this time and the prosecution were messing about and went, you know what? Let's take a chance with this guy.
Amazing, isn't it? Amazing. That must have been nice for you. How did that feel? How did it feel going back and saying to how old were your kids then?
They were about 3 and 4, the boys.
All right, so I've got a little one and I've got 2 young, but one about that age.
It was a great Christmas.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, it was.
What was it? Can you picture their faces?
Yes, I can. Yeah, when I came up, they didn't recognise me because what had happened was I was always a kind of clean-cut teddy boy type with greased back hair and the quiff and all that. And because this trial, my briefer told me 3 months into the remand that it hinged on identification, and everyone described me with greased back hair. I actually grew my hair and grew this horrible ginger moustache just to throw the jury off if it come to a trial that this is not me who'd done it. And I had this big floppy ginger moustache. No, it was just like flopped on my face like a hedgehog. and I had this hair with a centre parting, which they'd never seen. I looked like Hitler with this kind of long hair. And when I came out, I got bailed that day and my brother was at the court and he drove me down to see my dad who hadn't seen me for 10 months. And we walked into the pub where he was and I'm standing next to my brother smiling and my dad's talking to my brother and goes, what happened to him? Did they remand him in custody? And I was standing next to him, he didn't recognise me.
Wow.
And I went, wow, that would have been a great disguise for the jury. But by the time I went back, I had to get rid of all this. It was okay inside where no one could see me, but outside it was embarrassing.
Yeah.
But I've got found not guilty on all charges. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because the information you give us is not just first-hand over a long stretch of years, but it's also from other friends, other criminals you've met. You've all been sharing stories. So you've got all this data to go on. So it's not just almost like personal circumstances. You hear it from different angles, from different lines of crimes, etc. And you said about this guy who was very, very much against you, and then you had the lady who let you out for Christmas. Do you think they're going by personal experience and the experience from your friends and people you've met? Is there a difference between male and female judges?
I wouldn't like to make that generalisation because there used to be a judge in a London Crown Court, a female judge, who was a horror. She would sentence, she was known as bang 'em up, whatever her name was. And no matter what you appeared for, she was sending you to prison, whether it be 7 days or 20 years. So I don't think so. I think it's the individual personalities of the judges, really. Some judges are quite relaxed. Some judges are really... they're really into, well, as you would expect being a judge, they're really into the law. Everything has to be perfect. Some judges are a bit lax. I mean, I've had a trial once where a judge was asleep through most of the trial. And I mean, it was quite obvious he was asleep. He was snoring. And
he was genuinely asleep?
Yeah. And that's quite common because I don't know if you've ever been into a Crown Court even to watch. It's a soporific atmosphere. It's kind of lazy. There's a lot of, it's warm. There's a bit of a buzz where the briefs are talking to each other and you can't actually hear what they're saying. And there's a lot of that kind of time in the court where people are droning and some witnesses are really not very good at speaking and you can sit there and think, oh, hurry up. And a lot of people kind of doze off in court. I've dozed off in the box a couple of times during long trials. So it must be the same for judges. And they was a lot older than me. So, yeah, you have, different judges. And they always get a reputation, judges. If they're bad or if they're good, people will always look for them for some reason. The prosecution, if they know there's a bad judge who sentences everyone to jail, they want them on their case. If it's a good judge, the defence want them. So there is kind of a big mixture of judges. I've never really had any super bad judges apart from the last one. Can I tell you his name? His name was Ayling Qc. And he was a kind of rotund guy who was, he thought he was funny, but he wasn't. There was a police officer that gave evidence against me. And what had happened was, this couple was about 22.
When was this?
This would have been about 98.
So that was your big one? Was this the big
well,
sense?
it was sort of second big one,
Right.
yeah. So there was this copper, and in his statement he said, now bear in mind, the police are supposed to not look at each other's statements and write the same stuff, because that's a no-no. And this guy, he was about 20, he come in, and when he was talking about us escaping, he said they then facilitated their egress through, and my defence lawyer says, one moment, he said, facilitated their egress? What does that mean, officer? So he said, well, they made their escape. He said, well, why didn't you say that? And then the next copper comes in and he says the same thing. So my brief questions him again, why are you both saying the same obscure reference, facilitated his egress? And the judge then went, well, I think it's time for lunch. And he turned to the jury and he said, I think we should all facilitate our egress. And the jury laughed, and everyone in the court laughed. But he had to do it every time we had a break then, and the laughs got less and less. But he didn't seem to understand that people weren't finding it funny anymore. Yeah. It was quite a horror, to be honest. And, it turned out, and people really won't believe this sort of stuff, but what had happened was, I had my first trial at the Old Bailey on this case. The jury couldn't agree. They were out 5 days, and my sister actually asked one of the jury outside after the case, what was the hold-up in there? And they went 50% for, 6 people were for not guilty, 6 people for guilty, and no one was changing. So I assumed I got a good chance on the next trial. So we had a retrial a week later in the same court with a different jury, with a different judge, Ayling Qc, and it turns out he knew all the jury. They'd been with him on his previous trial. Some of you will know me from our previous trial. Hello, and I'm thinking, I've got no chance against this mob. I'm pleading not guilty. But here's the funny thing. Of the 12 jurors on my second trial, 10 of them were women, middle-aged women. I've got nothing against that. But there was one woman in the front who looked like Fred West. You know Fred West? The image of Fred West. And every day when she come in, it started with us looking at each other and then me winking at her. And over the course of the trial, she used to smile at me every day when she come in. So I told my barrister, my QC, underneath the court, I said, I think I've got one of the jurors, because she's like smiling at me every day and all that. We've got a bit of a relationship going. He went, that's fantastic. Come the day when the jury went out to do their verdict, they came in. Have you got a chairperson? Says the judge. She stands up. I'm like that. Oh, inside I'm thinking, oh my God, she's the chairman. Brilliant. And he went, and on charge 1, how do you find the defendant? And I've never heard so much venom in someone's voice. She went, guilty. And looked at me as if to say, gotcha. And I thought, you horrible girl. But anyway, what happened was they found me guilty on all the charges. They took 25 minutes to find me guilty on 16 counts when my previous jury were out 3 or 4 days and could not agree.
So it literally does just go down, maybe this is the wrong phrase, luck of the jury.
It definitely is.
Because, it could just, it depends what kind of mood they're in.
Yeah.
And it does make me wonder, and I'm going to bring this up another time, it's another conversation to have in another podcast, but how many people just got the wrong jury?
Quite a few.
On the wrong day.
I mean, criminals and people in this country will tell you that, experienced criminals, the best court to be in for a jury is the Old Bailey. And the reason for that is because the Old Bailey takes people from all over London. If you're in Knightsbridge, you're getting a jury that come from Knightsbridge and you're likely to be convicted. The Old Bailey takes everybody. But having said that, my best trial was in Inner London Crown Court, which is in the Elephant and Castle. Mm-hmm. And I've never seen a jury like it. It was the jury, I was up for the malicious woundings and all that.
Okay.
They were such a quick jury that what happened was they take you out of the box while the jury go out to deliberate and you're taken down to the cells below. In Inner London, underneath it's like a maze, so you have to go down long corridors. It takes about 7 minutes to get to your cell. As they take me down, we get to the cells and the phone on the wall rings where the other screw is. He picks it up and he went, his jury's back in. 7 minutes. So the screw's with me has gone, probably a question they want to ask the judge. Went back, no. They all come in with a verdict within 7 minutes. And do you know what amazed me?
Go on.
Half of them were about 25 years old in leather jackets and chewing gum, sitting there and not looking impressed when the prosecution, and I'm thinking, are these jury really listening? And it turned out they said to themselves, it's a fight, who gives a toss? They brought from the Elephant and Castle where it was the norm for them, so they found me not guilty.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Mental.
7 minutes, the shortest jury, GBH jury in the London Crown Court ever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
7 minutes. Yeah. Well, do you know, again, just great stories, great content, and it's really interesting. I mean, it's just stuff that, I mean, people just don't know.
No.
You just don't. Unless you've been there, you don't know. Even you telling me now, I'll still never know. You know.
See, the thing is, while I'm talking about it, I'm actually there. I can still feel the experience of walking through those corridors, the echoing, and thinking your life might be over. Yeah, I'm looking at 20 years here. My brief said to me, you're looking at least 15 to 20 if you get found guilty. So, you know, when you're in that sort of, everything is heightened to you because it may be the last time you're ever going to see the outside again, or the last time you're going to see the outside of a prison cell.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about this more, but I have to say you're describing it fantastically because I was there in my own way.
Oh, good.
Certainly
good.
not there, but...
well, maybe bad, because I don't want you to be there.
No, I don't want to be by what you've talked about, particularly in that the last podcast as well. But thank you so much for your time, as always. And if you're watching this on the YouTube, then if you've got a question for Noel Razor Smith, just write it below. We'll get to it and we'll do our best to answer that for you. And remember to subscribe and hit the little bell so you know about new content. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, you can email us with any questions, and that is intheslammer@monkeynutuk.com. That's intheslammer@monkeynutuk.com. Thanks for your time, Noel.
No problem.
You've been listening to In the Slammer with Noel Razor Smith, hosted by Elliott Frisby, music by Andrew Stamp, produced by Chris Byland, recorded at Monkeynut Audiobooks. For more information, visit the In the Slammer Facebook page or visit monkeynutuk.com. If you have a question or want to contact Noel Razor Smith, then please email intheslammer@monkeynutuk.com.